What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Shadowstorm here with my very first ever YouTube video as well as my first ever podcast. Today, starting off my series, the special guest having the honor of being on my first podcast is an up-and-coming author and amazing artist. She's majoring to be an art teacher or professor. Everyone, please welcome MysticSparkleWings.
Bonjour.
How have you been doing today? How has your day been?
I'm pretty good so far. Just been trying to get everything set up, which took a while, but...
Oh yeah, it's proven difficult. We are here today to talk about art-related topics, which is her expertise area. And I thought we'd start off with, the first section. What is your experience with each of the following? And what is any advice you might have for beginners for drawing, painting, digital art, writing, and sewing?
Okay, so for drawing, I joined DeviantArt in February of 2011, and that's about when I first started getting serious about art, drawing in particular. I mostly do stylistic or illustration type drawings, though I have dabbled in other areas. At first, I was just a kid making up characters for shows that I liked, and to an extent, I still am. But I've also found more appreciation for doing my own thing and experimenting. And part of my advice is to always be experimenting. Though I will say, if you find something that really works for you with drawing or anything else, there's no shame in sticking to it. For instance, I can do realistic art, but it's just not something that interests me, so I usually don't.
You like to create something of your own, something that doesn't technically exist or look real, it's from your imagination.
For the most part, yeah, but I will use references, which, if realistic art is something that interests you, the best advice I have is to find a good reference photo or take one yourself and split it up into a grid and just take it one square at a time. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, and the internet, I'm sure, will be happy to show you. I've used that method before myself, and it really does make a difference. But overall, I'd say the best thing to do when you're first starting out is to just do it. Get started and keep going, because you'll never get any better if you don't do it. And you don't need fancy supplies. You can draw with pretty much any pencil and paper and still make something great. Painting. I actually don't paint that much. I have in the past, and I have collected some paint in my art supply stash over the years. But like realistic drawing, while I have the utmost respect for those that do paint and do it well, it's just not something that I'm personally interested in doing. Also, I guess not even spray paint, cans of spray paint. Oh, I don't think I've ever actually spray painted before. Not more than just like getting like the Halloween hair color and like spray it on a thing, like, oh, does this work? Yep, it works. Okay, time to put it on my hair. Also, I never really had a good experience with painting growing up in art classes. And the other thing is there are actually 4 different kinds of paint: watercolor, acrylic, oil, and gouache. And there are so many options to choose from within those 4. I've already got plenty of stuff to choose from between different types of like colored pencils and markers. I feel like I don't need to go down the paint rabbit hole too.
I've never heard of that last one you mentioned. What? Gouache? Yeah.
Yeah, it's from what I understand, it's kind of the best of the other 3 different worlds in some ways, but I'm not a painting expert, so. But my advice, fortunately, I've had the opportunity to sort of sit in on some painting classes because of the way that my art class at the community college right now is. And one of the things that I've overheard in there that I think is really good, helpful advice is to paint what you see, not what you think you see. And that can apply to other things too. And I mean, of course, that mostly goes if you're doing something realistic, but and then the other thing, me personally, I would suggest to do some research and maybe decide which of the different types of paint you'd be interested in getting comfortable with. And then once you get comfortable with one of them, then maybe branch out into the others. I feel like it's maybe a little too much to try and take them all on at one time. Okay, digital art.
The area that I know less about.
Yeah, okay. I actually didn't know anything about digital art at all until after I joined DeviantArt. And I still have my first 4 deviations up. They're digital, and they're pretty terrible compared to what I can do now. But I keep them up because of what they represent, which is how far I've come, what I've learned, and how much I've grown. And I feel like digital art can be very intimidating and overwhelming when you first get into it, because I've been there and I've seen other people just getting started. And I know I've had my share of struggles with it over the years, but it does get easier. And there are certain tools that they're not required, but they can really make a difference if you're having trouble. My best advice is that the internet is an infinitely valuable resource, and you should use that to your advantage. I am almost completely self-taught in digital art, and I owe all that to tutorials online. Let's see. Writing. I don't think it was until middle school when the writing bug really bit me. I've got a tattered red notebook around somewhere that I filled with a story, and when I went back to transcribe it a few years ago, I learned it was horribly flawed. It's still up in my DeviantArt gallery, again, because of what it represents. And there was also Clockwork, a fantasy adventure novel that I ended up with about 18 short chapters of, and most of that's on DeviantArt as well. I tried to revise it a few times, but ended up just outgrowing it, so it never went anywhere.
I was going to say that sounds familiar, but I'm probably thinking of Clockwork Orange.
Probably, yeah. I don't even know where I got the name from, because if what I remember of the story had nothing to do with clocks or steampunk or anything, so I don't know why I called it that. It just sounded cool.
I don't even know. I haven't even read Clockwork Orange, so I don't know what it's about. I just heard the name a lot.
I think it's an old horror movie, I think, because I know one of the YouTubers I'm subscribed to, she has a wrist tattoo that says Real Horror Show, and it's from that. I don't know. But back to, I'm most proud of the novels that I wrote for NaNoWriMo 2015 and 2016, which are also on DeviantArt.
And what exactly is NaNoWriMo for those viewers that don't know exactly what it is?
NaNoWriMo, which is spelled NaNoWriMo, because this is auditory, stands for National Novel Writing Month. And there's a website, nanowrimo.org, and it is a challenge to write a 50,000 word or more novel during the 30 days of November. And it's probably the best way to get yourself into the habit of writing every day. 1,667 words to be exact.
Wow.
Yeah, they do a lot to make the writing process easier and less isolating. And I think all the little things really do make a difference. Weekly pep talks from authors, forums, perks for participating and winning, all kinds of stuff. Beyond that, as far as writing goes, I feel like there's a little too much emphasis placed on structure and less on style. Like I've said already, it's one of those things where it's really just finding what works for you and going with it. And sewing. I actually don't have a ton of experience with sewing, but my mom has a machine, Okay, so looks like, okay, so we'll just do in sections and then you'll
Yeah.
put it together. Okay, I can do that.
And starting with the sewing.
Okay. Sewing, I actually don't have a ton of experience with, but my mom has a machine, and I did take 2 apparel classes in high school where that was the primary thing that we did, which was a lot of fun. I did make a dress that I wear on occasion, and I feel like the classes and experience gave me a better understanding and appreciation for clothes and what goes into making them. I will say that working with a sewing machine is where the trouble starts. The first year I took apparel, I ended up with a temperamental machine. It wasn't always a problem, but it could be really frustrating sometimes when it would just not cooperate like it was supposed to. And the next year, the teacher actually warned everyone to stay away from that machine because there had been so many problems with it, not just with me, with other people too. And you would not believe the difference that having a different machine made. And I also learned 2 things pretty quickly both times. The first being that I am apparently left-footed, which is weird because I'm right-handed. And so there's a foot pedal under the machine on the floor. That's how you get it to work. You press that down like a car gas pedal. And for whatever reason, I just had a harder time making my right foot cooperate. Left foot was a lot easier for me. And then the other thing that's also part of that was that I could never just find the right amount of weight to put on the pedal and just leave it there. As I would start focusing on the fabric in front of me, I would always I would stop thinking about my foot, and I would just slowly end up putting more weight on it, and the machine would start going too fast. So I found that I had to find a rhythm of putting my foot down and picking it back up. And like I said, that was a lot easier with my left foot than my right foot. So I would say that if you're working with a machine and you're having problems, maybe try switching it up like I did. Try finding little things here and there that make that process easier. And I would also remember that while the machine cannot think for itself, it may still have a mind of its own. And hand sewing with a needle and thread is a lot easier than working with a machine. It's just a lot slower.
Alright, I think that does it for section 1. Section 2 is mostly about you. What was it like for you growing up? How does your upbringing factor into your creativity?
I had crop fields for neighbors growing up and just generally didn't get out much. That hasn't changed. I had my older brother, but he was like every teenage boy and spent most of his time alone in his room playing video games, which now that I'm older, I can completely understand. But I spent a lot of time on my own, just me and my thoughts and my toys. I remember drawing on the walls, and my parents didn't encourage it exactly, but they were more of the mentality that it wasn't a huge deal because they could always paint over it. And even as early as first grade, I remember pretty much always making up stuff when the dreaded my weekend journal prompt would come up, because I always felt like I just didn't have much of a life in comparison to the kids that I saw on TV and like my peers. So I've been doing creative things for a long time. Whenever I would play with dolls or color in coloring books, I would just sit and talk and make up stories as I went along to nobody, just a kid in a room. And it wasn't often, but my mom did do some scrapbooking and crafting when I was younger, and I got dragged into that too. So overall, I had a pretty creativity-friendly childhood. And I know a lot of that has paid off into where I am today. And I feel like maybe that's why a lot of people check out from doing things like writing and art fairly early on. They get discouraged when they're really little, and by the time they find interest in it again, it feels like it's too late. I was fortunate enough that didn't really happen to me, at least not with writing or art or anything like that.
Oh, Interesting. What about your more recent and present creative endeavors?
Would you believe I actually looked up the definition of professional the other night? Uh, Reason being, I did some commission work for my brother recently. I did some YouTube banners and a logo for him. Technically, my first time getting paid with real money for a commission as opposed to DeviantArt's cryptocurrency points. And since I don't have another job, I believe it's by the second definition, I technically qualify as a professional artist now, which is exciting. I've also been in talks with my high school art teacher over story time. I did a piece my junior year at her request, and it went off to a college show competition thing. And then it went on display at the mall for a while, and eventually it ended up on display at the county office for our public schools. So I haven't seen it in about 2 years, but I was always under the impression that I was going to get it back. Well, about a month ago, I finally got around to emailing the teacher and asking her about it, and she emailed me back saying that apparently there was a potential buyer and asking if I would be willing to sell.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, that was a wow moment for me too. And my initial reaction was no, like I haven't seen it in 2 years and I worked really hard on it. But the more I thought about it, the more I think if the price is right, I probably will sell it. But I haven't heard anything else after giving her my reply since we've had weather issues, and she probably hasn't even been in to check her school email. But I'm interested to see where that goes. Beyond that, I've just
I
been
hope it goes well for you. That sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah, me too, because I'm hoping what happens is that the price is right and I can just turn around and spend the money on art supplies.
Yeah.
But yeah, beyond that, I've just been working on the occasional like art for other people, some fan art here and there, trying out new supplies. And I did write a 2-part short story that I'm really happy with, but I still need to edit and post part 2. I think that's about it for relevant stuff anyway.
Wow, that is a really good opportunity. Buying art. What about the future and your goals?
Short-term future, I'm debating on doing Inktober, which is where you do an ink drawing of some kind every day in October. They just released the official prompt list, which is you don't have to use that, but it's encouraged, so that's why it's on my mind. I'm also debating if I want to try to do NaNoWriMo again this year. Last year I was just way too busy for that or for Inktober.
Inktober, would that count as like doing line art without coloring it in?
Yeah, that's what most people do. I tried to do Inktober last year, but I failed sometime during the second week. And NaNoWriMo, I was just way too busy. I kind of did get that in though, because I did like the Halloween script for one of our theater classes. But,
oh yes.
Yeah, I just had too much going on. But we'll see how it goes this year. Long term, I want to be an art teacher, so finish the necessary schooling and find my place somewhere as a teacher. But I wouldn't mind finding a different or better way to go about it than that. I'm not really impressed with the education system right now in a lot of different ways. And I just really enjoy teaching outright, so I'm open to new doors and ideas, and so we'll see what happens.
Who has contributed, to your love for art? Who has inspired, motivated, and supported you the most?
Okay, this was a surprisingly tricky question. My family and friends, of course, have done all of those things. My Chemical Romance, who I discovered 2 years too late, they've really kept me going with a plethora of their songs and the meanings behind them. And
what
I've
would
always
you
been,
say is your favorite song of theirs?
Probably Boy Division, which is from one of the conventional weapons releases that they did.
Mine has always been Black Parade, personally.
I think that's a lot of people's favorites. It's definitely their most popular. I think that's their most popular album too. And I've always been inspired by various books, being that I'm an avid reader and my bookshelf glares at me every time I come home. But I know if it wasn't for DeviantArt, the website as a whole, I wouldn't have the appreciation and passion for art that I do. Especially since I've had plenty of teachers over the years that have inspired me for all the wrong reasons, namely correcting their mistakes or proving them wrong. And there are deviants like Fridge Poet Project, who inspired me to do a 365-day mini magnet poem challenge. Or there's Cricket Umpire, Deadly Cookie 98, and Spitfire, who regularly engage me in conversation on the site, and I can always look forward to that. And there are others like Aneurysm Guy, who regularly donates points to me as a little thank you, which is always really nice. And ever since probably about a year after I've joined, I have had my awesome, amazing friend, Raindrop Lily. She's always been there for me, and she's really been there with me almost every step of the way on my artistic journey, and I so do not deserve her. And of course, over the years, I've collected a fair share of watchers, which are a constant silent support and reassurance to me that I also don't deserve. And I could go on, but I feel like those are some of the more important highlights.
What tool? Well, that finishes section 2. Or section 3 is mostly tools. What tools do you use for traditional pencil and paper art? What tools do you recommend for beginners to use?
I want to preface that by saying you can make art with pretty much anything. That said, I usually use either Prismacolor Premier colored pencils or some form of alcohol-based marker like Copics or the Prismacolor brush markers for coloring tools. For paper, I like Strathmore, which is a brand, particularly their toned gray and toned tan paper for colored pencils because they really pop. And I like the Canson XL mixed media paper for markers. But I won't hesitate to use just regular copy paper if I don't feel like dragging out a sketchbook. And I do like to branch out and experiment with new tools, especially if they have a really good reputation. For beginners, like I said, you can really use anything. But I think if you can afford them, colored pencils, Prismacolor Premier probably are the best because they're a soft core, which I think makes it easier to layer and blend, which can be a little trickier when you're first starting out. And for artist quality pencils, they are one of the more affordable brands, but there's plenty of options out there, and there are less expensive pencils that you can still get good results with. I don't really recommend markers for beginners, but there are a ton of options out there, and even I'm still toying around finding brands that I like. Copic is probably the name that everybody knows, and they are a quality product, but they're pretty expensive. Overall, I would just different kinds and look at the reviews and see what you can find. You'll probably find something that suits you and your price point best. Also, it's not a requirement, but I would really recommend getting a light box. It makes it so you can trace your sketch onto another piece of paper so you don't have to worry about mistakes as much. And I've got one and I find it extremely useful. But bottom line, find what works for you. And if what works for you is not very expensive and not a lot of people use it, that's perfectly fine.
Where would you recommend looking for these tools that you have mentioned?
Amazon, first and foremost. Places like Michael's and Joann's and Hobby Lobby, like the big craft stores, they might be okay if they're having a really good sale or you have a coupon, but most of the time they really upcharge the supplies. I've done a lot, and I mean a lot, of price checking on different supplies, and Amazon is almost always the best option. Occasionally, eBay can do you one better. Just make sure the seller has good reviews and you read the description thoroughly. If those two sites aren't an option, there are sites like dickblick.com and Jerry's Artorama, which are like art supply websites that you can try. I'd only use physical stores as a last resort.
Interesting. I think these next two questions are going to be exactly the same as the last two, except this time it would be for digital art or online art.
Okay, tools. First of all, I upgraded to my digital art tools over time, and I've seen people do amazing things without these tools. But I use Photoshop and Paint Tool Saw as my primary art programs, and I use this is a mouthful, Wacom Cintiq Companion 1 display drawing tablet. Photoshop is probably a bit much for when you're just starting out, speaking from experience, because it's a photo editing program and technically not made for drawing specifically, so there's a lot of extra stuff in there that you're not necessarily going to use. Paint Tool Saw, on the other hand, I definitely recommend for beginners because of the line work layers, which can be really useful when you don't have a drawing tablet. But both programs do cost money after a free trial. But there are plenty of free programs you can find out there on the internet. All you have to do is take one teeny tiny little peek and you will find plenty of them. Especially ones that try to emulate how Photoshop works, because Photoshop's so popular. And again, I recommend just doing research to find one you think will work for you, try different ones out, see what you like. And as for the tablet, while I do highly recommend a drawing tablet because they make things so much easier, I didn't start out with one, and I had I can't even speak. I had a much less fancy one for like 5 years before I got the super expensive fancy one that I have now. And the only reason I stopped using that one was it was just time for me to upgrade. I've seen plenty of artists on DeviantArt that have never used one, and the one that I use is definitely a luxury item, so you can do amazing things without them. And there's a plethora of options for drawing tablets too. There's smaller ones without a screen that can go for around $20 to $30. And there are really super expensive ones that go for insane amounts of money, usually because they can work as a computer on their own. And I will say that, like with the Prismacolor pencils, Wacom is a quality brand if you can afford it. I started out with their cheapest model at the time, which has since been discontinued, and it was around $80. That's the one that I still have, and it still works just fine. Nothing wrong with it. Most of the time, companies make drawing tablets to last. They're not just in it like cell phone or gaming console companies that, they toss out a new one like every year or every other year.
Ah, right. Continue.
As for where to find those things, still Amazon and eBay. They usually charge less than the official brand's websites. And with eBay, you can often find the more expensive models significantly cheaper, like I did. And they're in brand new, perfect condition with all the accessories. The Cintiq that I have, I found on an eBay listing for, I think, like $450. Brand new from Wacom, it would have been $2,000 or more. and it took months of searching for me to find it at that good of a price. And we ended up making an offer. We went back and forth a little bit. I think we ended up paying around $375 for it, which is a huge discount. And I love that thing. It is magic. It was well worth the effort that it took to get a hold of it. As for programs, like I said earlier, just one teensy tiny peek at the internet, you should be able to find plenty of different options to choose from. So it's really just a matter of finding one that you like.
What about some good art sharing websites for both digital and traditional art?
Well, my favorite is obviously DeviantArt. But from what I hear, Tumblr and Instagram are pretty good. There's also Art Amino, which is an app that a lot of art YouTubers have been sponsored by. I haven't tried Art Amino myself, but if it's anything like the Pokemon Amino I tried a while back, it's probably pretty good.
I have heard a lot about the Amino app.
Yeah, I'm a little bit wary because I've seen a couple things where people have had problems with it, but
What are some good websites and for talking to artists and art communities in general to learn and share experiences?
honestly, most any art section of any social media should be good for that. YouTube is really good because you're often getting entire videos directly from the artist about their experiences. And again, I say DeviantArt as I've had very positive experiences within the community and have seen plenty of experiences being shared and stuff like that. And I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine Reddit might be pretty good since it's a discussion-based website.
Oh, interesting. What are some artists on YouTube or anywhere you would recommend for more information about various kinds of art?
I'm actually not subscribed to that many art YouTubers, but of the ones that I am, Coloring Bliss is probably my favorite for traditional art. She provides in-depth reviews, like really in-depth, really good, very trustworthy. She has a website with plenty of free coloring pages and other resources, and she does live events every Wednesday, which I feel like that combination is kind of rare to find an artist who does all those things on YouTube. But she does really awesome stuff, good quality content. Bailey J is really good for stylistic illustration marker art, because that's primarily what she does. She's big into Copic markers. And she also does advice for beginners from time to time. And so far, of her videos like that I've watched, I agree with pretty much the majority of what she says. Chloe Rose Art and Super Ray Dizzle are both more realistic, and they do comparisons of cheaper supplies versus more expensive options. And they do various challenges regularly. They're more art entertainment channels, but you can still get some pretty good information from them.
Are there challenges between each other?
Not really. They have done a couple of collabs though, I think. They are friends, I know that. And the last one is MD Campbell, who's a former art teacher and has a lot of videos with just generally good art advice. That's about it though. Like I said, I just don't watch that many art YouTubers.
How do you balance your creative time with the rest of your life?
I happen to be at a place in my life where I'm fortunate enough to be able to dedicate pretty much as much time as I'd like to my creative things. I've also been doing the creative things that I do long enough. I can usually sense when it's time to take a break. And since I've learned how I work, I can usually estimate about how much, which makes finding the time to fit everything in a lot easier for me. That said, I'm fairly nocturnal, so I usually find a lot of my time late into the night and into the wee hours of the morning when nobody's awake.
Oh, that's very interesting. You don't have any issues or anything at all. You just have all this free time.
I mean, every once in a while we'll like go run errands or something, or like I have class, but I mean, it's usually not that big of a deal. I'm just not in a very crunch time place right now. I have been before, but usually if I end up in a situation where I'm pressed for time, it's my own fault for procrastinating. So
I can certainly understand that. I am quite the procrastinator myself. A
yeah,
bit too much. I need to break the habit somehow.
you could try doing what I usually try to I try to plan for the procrastination. I'm like, okay, I know I'm not gonna want to do it. I know I'm gonna sit here and procrastinate for a really long time. Let's just go ahead and plan on that.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, I actually I didn't know how to answer. I had to do I believe I told you about this already, but for the listeners, I had to do like a time diary thing for one of my college classes recently. And I remember when I first got the assignment, I'm looking at it like that you have the wrong person for this assignment because this is not how I
A time
operate.
diary. What exactly is that?
Okay, it says time diary. It really just means schedule. Yeah. I thought that was a little bit of a cheeky way to put it, but I actually did. We had some response questions, and I actually specifically put in the response questions, you know, I don't usually work well with the schedule, and like
yet they give you one anyway.
I know it was crazy to me. Like, not everybody works on a schedule. I actually getting off topic here, but I actually brought up the point that NaNoWriMo has I forget where you can find it on the site, but they have like this thing about are you a planner or a pantser, which means you're doing it by the seam of your pants. Like, are you the type of person who plans everything out and you have an outline when you go into it, or like do you just go with the flow as it comes? And they also have like, are you a planster, which is are you a mixture of the two? I'm usually a mixture of the two. Like, I have an idea of what I want to do, but I don't have it like I can't do an outline. I've tried. It just doesn't work for me.
I see. That makes sense. Oh. How do you deal with the pressures of being a writer and artist as well as a potential art teacher?
Typically, I throw myself into my work. That is my writing and my art when life starts to get to me. And if one of those things, and now I can't speak. And if one of those things starts giving me trouble, I'll switch to the other. Like, if both writing and art are giving me trouble, I know it's time to stop and take a break and just do something else. Fortunately, usually
Has
the
that
most
happened a lot?
It depends. Usually the fall is busy season for me, so that's when I have trouble with that sort of thing. But fortunately, usually most of the pressure I have is just finishing the projects I start, and that's pretty easily remedied by just taking the time to actually do that, to finish them.
All right. Well, how do you handle... I guess these two questions could have gone hand in hand and are kind of the same, but how do you handle any stress, anxiety, and hardships that come with being those things, both mentally and physically?
I thought about these two being kind of the same, but I felt they were different enough because my responses were different. So if I can afford to, usually I'll start by, like I said, just taking a break. If the project is stressing me out, I'm probably too into it. I need to step away and come back with a fresh pair of eyes. Or, like I said for the previous question, I'll switch to the other option. If art is stressing me out, I'll do some writing. If writing is stressing me out, I'll do something artistic. And sometimes it helps to get a second opinion if that's possible. And it's just common that I'm overthinking something, and that's why it's giving me trouble.
Huh, interesting. Has being a writer...
A lot of that stuff
Oh,
Sorry. A lot of that stuff goes for writers and artists and writers block too.
how ha- how has being has being a writer and artist affected you negatively in any way?
Not that I know of. If anything, both of those things have been very positive for me, giving me ways to deal with being alive and awake. Not to mention that both have led to experiences and interactions that I wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise, and they will hopefully lead me to a career that I can be happy with.
Okay, how do you cope with any negativity you receive towards your work? Now, I know, and I'm sure all of the viewers who are watching this know, from whether it be books, movies, TV shows, or literally anything within pop culture, that there are critics, but specifically the people who go above and beyond to specifically attack you and give you negativity for no reason.
As maturely as possible. If it is just outright criticism that isn't helpful, chances are that I'll just try not to think too much of it and ignore it. If it is actually constructive criticism that's supposed to be helpful, usually I'll try and take it into account, but I try very hard not to let it ruin everything for me, because I've, as an inexperienced writer and artist, I have had that happen to me before in the past, where I let it kind of become too much. So I try not to do that. And if it seems like the negativity comes from not understanding my intentions with the work, because I've seen that happen before, not just to me but to other people, I will gladly do my best to explain myself to clear things up.
That's good to know. But how do you deal with people that are like that continue over a long period of time to make rude comments about you or your work? Or have you ever dealt with that?
Fortunately, that hasn't happened to me, but I've been around on DeviantArt long enough to have seen it happen to plenty of other people. The best and easiest thing to do, if politely asking the person to stop doesn't work, or if you'd rather not get involved that way at all, is to simply mark the comments as spam and or block the person entirely. I've seen a lot of drama from the Winx community on that front.
Really, I wouldn't have thought something like that would happen for a kids show like that.
Well, it's one of those shows where the target audience from the company is usually younger than the age of the fans that are loyal to it and making art for it and stuff online.
Right.
And it was weird to me too, actually, because I think it was probably about 2 years after I joined DeviantArt.
The only negativity that I could think that it could possibly get at all would be the part where it's about magic, the same way Harry Potter was banned in, I think it was either here in 2001 or China, because of it relating to satanic worshipping and black magic and all of that. That's the only negativity I thought it could get.
Well, you have to kind of know the community, because it was really stuff within the community, and that was kind of what made it weird. It was a lot of drama over credit not being given where credit is due, and like there was a lot of drama. Like I could go on for hours about it, and it's terrible because you see the repercussions of it today. Like the community, and the phone's gonna ring. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
But you see the repercussions of it, because we lost a lot of great artists in that era for about 2 years. I think it was like 2 years after I joined, and then for like 2 years it got really bad. And it's just a shame to see so many artists and like resources and stuff just gone because it just got so bad. And I don't think the Winx community ever really recovered from that, to be honest.
Man, that's a shame. That's a real shame.
It is. Like, and like, I'm getting off topic here, I know, but just a few weeks ago, somebody posted something about there were these character templates that were really, really popular for a while back in the day. And the creator was one of those artists that we lost. And it was funny because they would leave and then they would come back on a different account, and they posted like new versions of the templates. And then at some point they just went off the grid entirely, as well as the templates. And that's really sad because those were really awesome templates and they were a really great resource. And now everybody's scared to use them because they don't know if it's okay or not or anything. It was really terrible.
With all of this being said, do you think people that react negatively in a hurtful or even unhelpful way will ever stop?
Unfortunately, no. There are always going to be people that feel like they have to do that for whatever reason, or even people that don't realize that that's what they're doing. The important thing is to see the difference between who are just trying to be mean, those that are just trying to help but are going about it the wrong way, and to also realize that a lot of the time you have to take the bad with the good. You can't please everyone, artists in the eye of the beholder, all that stuff. And I know a lot of YouTubers would say that if you have a lot of negativity in your comments section, you're actually doing something right.
Yes, truth. As you hope to be an art teacher, what are some of the things you plan to do with your classes? With different class levels, how would you divide what is taught in each one?
Okay, this was one of the more fun ones to do. Based on my own experiences, I would want to focus on teaching skills that you don't just use once for like one project and then they disappear off the face of the planet. I'd want to teach skills that you can use and then build on later, as I think that's genuinely more helpful in the long term. Also, if possible, I want to promote embracing that art is often messy. I feel like a lot of art classes focus a little too much on trying to keep everything clean, which I understand
I have
to a point.
about that. I've heard a quote that oftentimes, more often than not, the messiest people, like, even if it's their workspace or living space is messy, they tend to be the most creative and successful people.
I don't think of that specifically, but that sounds fairly accurate to me, yeah. And maybe it's just because I like the look of paint splatters, but I think it's much more encouraging to walk into an art room covered in literal marks of the past, as opposed to one that's more sterile than the nearest medical facility. As Miss Frizzle says, take chances, get messy, make mistakes. As for the different class levels, I like the approach that the painting classes that I mentioned I'm privy to earlier take. All three levels are doing basically the same thing, but more is expected of the more experienced students, and the teacher uses them to help out with the less experienced. Like the painting 1 and I think 2, they only have to do 4 paintings throughout the semester. The painting 3 have to do 5, for instance.
Wow.
And that would probably be a little trickier to do in a high school setting, but I think it could be done.
I didn't know it went up to 3.
Yeah, I was a little surprised about that myself, but it does. And I think that process would also maybe make lesson planning and grading a little easier to manage, since it's all kind of roughly the same thing. And I like that that takes more into account the skill level of the student, too.
While we were talking about paint splatters and messiness and stuff and things of the past and eras and stuff, I had the idea of a new question I wanted to just throw in here before we move on to the other ones that I have here. What is your thought on graffiti?
I think it's a really interesting art form, especially when you see what some people can do, because some people can do amazing things.
Yes.
That's graffiti. My only concern is that you do have to be careful about it because it is often illegal. But there are ways that you can do it where it is legal, and sometimes people will actually commission artists to do something on the side of their building to like advertise their business or whatever. And I think that's a good balance, is to, because it helps the artist out because it gives them a job to do and they get to do what they love, and it's good for the
Agreed.
business too.
And I have seen many, many beautiful creations of graffiti within New York City.
Yeah, and then the other thing is just that I sort of like the organicness of it. I'm really into urban exploration and abandoned places, and even though it is technically still illegal, sometimes you see some really interesting things that have been done in those places that's graffiti, and it looks really cool. And
A lot of
graffiti
the times it's pentagons and creepiness, but still it's interesting
I don't
to
count
see.
that as graffiti. I count that as like the crazy person that came in and just did whatever. But I also think like you can do graffiti style artwork on paper too, and that usually
Yes.
looks really cool to me.
I, in fact, am trying to work on a graffiti style artwork, but there's so much you can do with graffiti. There's so many things you can create that I'm having to do it on multiple pieces of paper to later be put together into one giant, I guess, mural or whatever.
Yeah, that's kind of the case for a lot of different types of art. Is there's just so much. You have to break it down into what you want to do, and then sometimes even that's still too much. But doing things separately and then combining them later, that's kind of one of my favorite things to do to mix media. I'll do, like, I've got a couple of pieces that I did like a background and then I did like a character drawing, but because I was scared I was going to mess one or the other up by combining them physically in real life, I would just scan them both in and combine them digitally. That's something I really like to do.
Alright, and again, sorry that I veered off course, but I had to get your opinion on that before I forgot about it. Well, anyway, how would you give out assignments and projects and handle things like due dates and deadlines?
Again, I like the way my current art teacher handles this, though, again, this would be trickier in a high school setting. She had the due dates and number of assignments set the first day and made everyone aware of them, but also said that if something happened, like our recent weather fiasco, she'd adjust the dates. And for the design class that I'm part of, she mentioned that our due dates were soft and more flexible because we're doing more than just painting. So I'd likely do the same thing, something like that, have due dates set with plenty of time in between, but be flexible depending on the circumstances and what the project actually is.
Yes, that is understandable. What are some of your hopes, dreams, and goals as an art teacher? What do you want to achieve?
Honestly, my main goal is to hopefully just do better than some of my past art teachers. And I only hope to not leave my students with the same frustration of being misled that my teachers often left me with. But I also want to see genuine improvement in the students, and hopefully for those that take art just wanting an easy A, help them learn to actually appreciate art even if they don't pursue it further or make a career out of it or whatever.
That's actually a wonderful idea.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do differently than art teachers from the past?
Oh boy, this was the fun one. A lot. As I mentioned, I want to focus on teaching skills to build on. I feel like too many times in the past in an art class, we learn about something, practice it for like a week, and then we do a project that took about a week, and then just never use those skills again. It felt like such a waste. And I'd also do my best to make sure that my students know there are other supply options out there. Remember I mentioned earlier there are 4 different kinds of paint?
Oh yeah.
I didn't learn that from any of my K through 12 art classes. There was watercolor and whatever Crayola stuck in plastic squeeze bottles as far as those classes were concerned. And I didn't appreciate
That's actually a good point. I never even realized that.
Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing by far, and I think you already know where I'm going with this, is that I would go out of my way to make sure students understand that there are still things that are right and wrong in art. I've been on DeviantArt for almost 8 years, and in that time, like I said about the Wings community, I've seen a lot of drama erupt over not giving credit where credit is due. And one of my former art teachers assigned copying a packet of 5 or 6 different reference photos that she would hand out at the beginning of each semester. And it was meant to give us something to do at the beginning of class to get into like art mode and another grade in the grade book, which that concept actually isn't that bad. Doing something at the beginning of class to get into art mode, that I like that concept. But my main concern is that that was not a good way to do it. First of all, it didn't take into account different skill levels or artistic interest. And the biggest thing is just there was never a word said about giving credit for the references or anything like that. Meanwhile, I ended up taking another class that was focused on working with programs like Photoshop that dedicated a lesson to that sort of thing right off the bat. Having seen the kind of damage that kind of ill practice can lead to, the whole idea made me furious. And I went so far as to use that for the basis of a public service announcement scene in one of our theater classes.
Okay. What kinds of things would you do to keep your students focused, interested, and there's a word that I'm thinking of, but it's not coming to me at the moment.
Engaged?
That's it. Engaged.
Okay.
And how would you keep them actively involved in learning in the classroom?
Okay, so the main thing would probably be using technology to my advantage. I feel like a lot of art classes maybe don't do that as much as they should. And like, after all, the internet and exploring on my own is largely what got me where I am with art. And when it comes to students that are less confident in their abilities, I feel like it would be really important to show them that a lot of art is just learning steps that you have to take and taking those steps. As well as sometimes you can get some of the best results with the simplest things. And just as well, I'd also make a point that they should be willing to defend their artistic decisions, maybe even challenge them to do so. And I feel like a lot of art classes really don't do that. It's either good or bad, and you don't get a chance to defend yourself. And I also think the idea of getting feedback from other students can be very useful, which would be something else for me to try and incorporate.
Sorry, I've had a bloody nose while I clean it up. What are you most excited about when it comes to being an art teacher? What are you least excited about?
I'm definitely most excited to see the students excited, as silly as that might sound. I want to see that moment where everything clicks and they're in the moment and everything is just coming together, because that's my favorite moment when I'm working on a piece. I want to see them progress and succeed and grow. And what I'm really not looking forward to is the students that just take the class for an easy A or because they have to, and they just are not willing to give the class a chance to be something more than just another grade they really don't care about. And whatever annoying restrictions I end up facing as part of the school that I teach at, but I mean, that's not really something that can be avoided.
Interesting. Now on to more of the serious areas. Do you believe that art is disrespected more than it is respected?
Simply put, no.
Huh. Alright, do you think people don't respect art and artists as much as they should? If so, what, if any, reasoning do you think there's behind it?
Again, I would say no. There are some people, sure, but I feel like for the most part that we're actually living in a time where art is fairly well respected overall, maybe even more so than it has been in the past.
That actually makes a good point and would make sense. In your opinion, is art often undervalued?
Yes and no.
Or overvalued, for example? Do you think people see it as it's just ink or paint upon canvas or paper, it means nothing, it has no value? Or do you think people see it as, this is just another thing to sell to get me a lot of money? I don't care what it means or how much work went into it, it's just gonna make me money. That's
Yeah,
kind of like what I mean.
yeah, definitely yes and no. I feel like art is often unappreciated in its time. Like, how many poor artists and their work did no one care about until after they died? And how many people think art is a waste of time or not a real job or whatever? But at
Yes.
the same time, I have seen art being overvalued, and there are a lot of ways you can take that statement, whether it's money or like people love it for no apparent reason. And sometimes it's overpriced, and you feel like something's getting a lot of attention when it doesn't deserve it. Sometimes it's the opposite of those things, like it's way too cheap, people are giving it away for free when they really shouldn't be, or there's a great artist who's not getting a lot of attention, stuff like that. It all depends on the situation.
Is it your impression that a lot of people think that if art isn't a museum, isn't in a museum or gallery, then the creator and the art are invalid and or not good enough?
I'm not sure I'd say a lot of people, but that's another, like, there are plenty of them out there, I'm sure, but there are always going to be people like that. You can't help it. Some people just don't like or understand art, just like me personally. I will never appreciate sports the way that many people do. And like I said before, you just can't please everyone.
And I guess this has basically been answered upon the entire podcast's course, but have people made you feel like your work should be undervalued?
Fortunately, no, not that I can remember. I've sort of always been the art kid, so if anything, you'd think I'd overvalue it. But because I know there are artists out there with a vastly different skill set than I've tried to be very humble about how I value my work. Like, I know I have talent, but I'm not the greatest thing since sliced bread either.
Interesting. What are your comments on the Throw Your Children's Art Away article?
Right. Okay. So it popped up in my Facebook feed one day. I think DeviantArt's official Facebook page shared it or something. And I feel like the article makes a good point about not every last little scribble that you ever make is going to be important. But I also feel like it misses the point that usually, whether it's the artist themselves or a well-meaning parent, for the most part, we as humans, I think, are capable of telling when a piece of art took enough time and effort to be worth saving, even when it comes to early childhood pieces. I wish we had saved more of my work from when I was a kid, or that it didn't just poof out of existence like it seems to have some of it. I'm always appreciative when I rediscover something I had forgotten that I ever made. And I love seeing the comparison between where I started and where I am now. And there are at least a few things that I remember making that I have no idea what happened to them. Kind of like even my scribbles on the wall in our old house are still there. They may be covered up by stuff now, but they're there. It's not like, my best work in the world or anything like that, but to me, it's nice to have the comparison. But I can see how some people, though, they have kids that they're not into art, and, maybe they can be a little more casual with what they keep and what they throw away. But for the most part, I think that's the thing about the article, is they kind of miss the point a little bit of why we keep that stuff.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
For a minute, I thought when you showed it to me, I thought you were talking about it's a good idea to throw it away or whatever.
Well, that's what the article says. Like, it's a good idea to throw it away because it makes you less of a pack rat. Like, you have less stuff to worry about keeping track of. And most kids, they're like going to outgrow that.
It sounds like they've never heard of a filing cabinet or anything like that.
Well, the thing is like, this is why I think they're it's a good and bad article. Like, it makes a good point, but it also misses the point.
Yes.
Because they talk about, like, parents that keep everything in boxes, and it comes from, like, a parent who's deciding what to keep and what to throw away, their kids' artwork, stuff like that. But again, I feel like most of the time, especially if you're an artistic parent to an artistic child, definitely then you can usually figure out, this took a lot of time and effort, let's keep it. Oh, this is a know-nothing scribble, this can be thrown away.
Interesting. I had this idea, another, I guess, form of art that came up, and I guess it could be technically for Section 1, but what about when back in elementary school when we did clay pottery and all of that?
Oh yeah, that's a whole sector of art unto itself, like sculpting, and you can do it with more than just clay and stuff. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually really hated that it seemed like we did a lot of different kinds of art, like in earlier schooling than later schooling. Like, we did not do one single clay project my entire time in high school. And we only did one, I think, when I was in middle school the entire time, like all 3 years. And that was a big disappointment to me, because I feel like at that level, it's actually better to do more, because you can, like, go into more detail and put more emphasis on certain things that are harder to do when you're dealing with little kids.
Exactly, because you're older, you'll be able to absorb the knowledge and keep it longer.
Right, and sometimes you can just do more complicated stuff that you wouldn't have been able to do with small children.
Alright, well, this is more serious stuff, but do you think that art is dying out, or that people are becoming less interested?
I wouldn't say so. If anything, I'd say that it's thriving. There are more ways than ever to make a career, or at least make an impression with art, and that seems to be very encouraging to people. It's also more accessible than it has been in the past, which helps.
Do you think that traditional, non-digital art will ever fade away?
Certainly not. I think it's about like when ebooks first started getting popular, or when CGI was first introduced to animation. It seems like it will, but ultimately there are always going to be things you can do with traditional art that you just can't with digital, and you can't replicate them accurately. Just like an e-reader can't replace the feeling of a real book in your hands, and computer animation just same as hand-drawn. You can, and you can't, like, for instance, you can't really like sculpt clay digitally.
Yeah, that's true. Even though people get 3D printers and they can say, I 3D printed this clay sculpture with this statue.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, when you talk about something like that, you do have to take into account the skill that goes into making the blueprint for the printer, but it's still not quite the same as actually like doing with your hand, actually building the thing yourself.
Well, do you have any? We are in the last section of questions that I have prepared. Any weird facts, jokes, puns, or riddles about art or writing that you would like to share?
I looked through my entirely overflowing Pinterest boards, and I actually had trouble coming up with like jokes, because most of it's like sad irony type of statement things. But I did find, it's not really a joke, but one of my favorite things is there's this quote with a picture of Doctor Who. At the top it says, when a family member needs you in the middle of writing an intense scene, and then the quote below it is, you can't just turn it.
I'm sorry, you got to re-say that. You broke up a little bit.
Because that's so true, and that goes for art too. Which part?
The quote.
Okay. You can't just turn it on and off like a tap.
Oh, yes.
And that goes for art too. Like, it's so true, because sometimes you have to take inspiration as it comes, and it's so terrible when you finally hit on the idea and then you get called away and you come back and you're like, you've forgotten it. That is the worst thing in the world.
Agreed.
I do have a couple of facts though. Harvard has a pigment museum. They have jars of like the things that, you know, people like would grind up and then mix with other things to make paint.
Oh yeah.
Not only to preserve the history, but it also aids in research into like restoring old artwork. And the collection, this is my favorite part, even includes paint made from ground up mummies. And it was called Mummy Brown, and they made it like into the 1940s, and they ran out of mummies.
Interesting. And kind of gross.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm a nut for ancient Egypt stuff, so that's why that was interesting to me. I actually would really want to go and just see all the jars of pigment lined up because I have a thing with art supplies, so that would be a magical moment for me. The other one is that, and I actually only learned this fairly recently from my psychology textbook. Apparently, a lot of artists are stereo blind, which means there's a more technical definition, but to get the point across, it basically means they just don't see the world with both eyes the same way that most people do.
That's a good point.
Yeah, there's like this thing called visual disparity, which comes from like seeing out of both eyes properly. They don't have that. Apparently a lot of artists don't. And that was really interesting to me, being that I'm an artist and my right eye is lazy. Like everything looks like a giant blur out of it. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And that kind of feels like it explains a lot for me. Other than that, though, like, I don't know, that kind of stuff was really surprisingly hard to come by.
What are your biggest pet peeves when it comes to art and writing? What things make you cringe out loud?
Okay, top of the list is this thing called joke OCs. OC stands for original character for the listeners. The term Mary Sue gets thrown around a lot online, and you can look up what that is because it's kind of hard to explain. And it's led to a lot of people making OCs specifically to make fun of the kinds of character they deem as Mary Sue's. They're annoying, and if anything, I would argue they probably make the problem worse instead of better. And it also kind of bothers me that people do that because it feels like because you don't know if that artist is a beginner just starting out and they don't really know any better. And even if they do know better, like, it's their art, let them do what they want with it type of situation. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's inherently bad. Sometimes it is, but it doesn't mean that by default. The other thing, and this isn't like a huge deal, but sometimes it kind of annoys me when an artist makes this great, fantastic thing, and then when they post it, there's like no description, and you know nothing beyond what you see. But I kind of understand why some artists do that because they're not in the habit of writing a super long description like somebody, meaning myself. And sometimes it's a very intentional choice because you just don't want to share the story behind the work. And then this one's more about books than writing, but I do kind of get annoyed when I see a book that has like this really awesome cover or title and it just doesn't match the content of the book.
Oh, I've seen that happen before.
Yeah, but at the same time, that's kind of subjective, so I feel like I can't harp on that too much. And I feel like there was something else that I didn't write down, but I have forgotten what it was. But if I'll probably think of it later when it's irrelevant, but if I think of it while we're recording, I'll let you know.
All right. Have you ever done anything related to your pet peeves on purpose or by accident?
I did used to do the short or none at all description thing when I was younger, mostly because I didn't think about it. But I give myself more of a pass for that since I was young and still learning. The other two I pretty actively avoid and pretty much always have as far as I can remember.
How do you handle when you see someone else doing these things that bother you? Do you tell the person directly and or try to help them do better?
Really, I usually don't say anything. When it comes to the joke OCs, typically the people that make them aren't the type of people that are going to just stop because someone doesn't like it. And to be fair, they're entitled to their opinion, and that's their time and their art. If that's what they want to do, I can't really stop them. I don't like it, but living with it and ignoring it is usually easier than trying to fix it.
Understandable.
Same goes for the other things, in which case it's usually not my business anyway. And like, because I'm usually like seeing a book at Goodwill or something, and it's like has this epic cover or this really creative title, and then I start reading the description, and it's like, one day this person did this.
Yes.
And I'm just like, well, that was a waste of a title and a cover, but that's just me. And like I said, it's subjective, so.
Wow, we've reached actually the end of my list of questions and topics for you. What do you have for last minute tips, advice, etc.?
Like I said more than once, it's all about finding what works for you, regardless of what creative thing you're doing. Beyond that, when it comes to writing, don't get discouraged if you have trouble getting your support group to read your work. I still can't get most of my family and friends to actually read what I write, especially when it's something long. Usually they say they will, and then like they just don't have time, or evidently it's just not that important to them. But I've learned to live with that. In the same vein, if you're posting your art online, don't get lost in the numbers. It's a very easy thing to do, and I still struggle with it myself from time to time. But as long as you're doing something that makes you happy and you're not like hurting anybody else or yourself or whatever, it doesn't really matter what the rest of the world thinks about it.
Interesting. Well, I believe we've actually reached the end of my first ever video and my first podcast. And we've gone over just about everything that I've had and that I've definitely wanted to know about. Thanks again, MysticSparkleWings, for coming on to my show and for enlightening all of us with your vast and in-depth knowledge. I really do appreciate it.
No problem. I actually really enjoyed getting to share a lot of this stuff.
Everyone, please give her a round of applause and thank her for coming on to speak with us. And please, by all means, if you wish to show her support, check out some of the stuff she's done, or just ask her for help and stuff. All her links will be down in the description below if she would very much like that to happen.
Yeah, I'm always up for helping new artists. That kind of goes into my wanting to be a teacher, so.
Anyway, yes, sorry, go ahead.
I'll try to give support in any way that I can, and support to me is always appreciated because I know you don't have to do that, and it's really nice if you do.
And you definitely do deserve the support, as we all do. Everyone needs some support here and there. Anyway, thank you all for watching. This has been my first podcast video ever. Stay safe out there. Don't get too crazy. I hope you all do well, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.
Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face. Tell me that you love me.